Masechet Menaḥot Daf Lamed Daled. We begin with some more laws of mezuzah, and then we will go into some of the halachot of tefillin. Itmar lul patuach min habayit la'aliyah. Amar Rav Huna im yesh lo petach ehad hayav b'mezuzah achat. Im yesh lo shene petachin hayav bishte mezuzot. It said that if you have a little opening from one floor of a house to the upper floor. In other words, think of a two-story home, a two-family home, and you have a staircase in between. In order to maintain some privacy between the lower floor and the upper floor, you might have a door, maybe a landing and a doorway between the staircase and the first floor and between the staircase and the second floor. So the question is, do you have to put a mezuzah in that doorway? So Rav Huna says yes. And if there's only one doorway, maybe there's only a doorway from the first floor to the staircase, and then it's open on top. Well, then that one would need a mezuzah. And if there are two openings at the bottom and top of the stairway, then both of them would require a mezuzah. Amar Rav Papa, Shema Amina mid Rav Huna, hay inderona diit le'arba'a babe, haya barba mezuzot. Rav Papa says we can learn from Rav Huna that if you have a room with four gates, four openings to the same room, then all of them would require a mezuzah. Since you just said that the stairwell requires two if there's two openings, so the same would be for a room with four openings. And so we ask, Peshita, isn't that obvious? Every doorway needs a mezuzah, yes. La sericha afalgav deragil behad. I was teaching us, even though one uses only one of the doorways regularly and the other ones just stay closed, even so, if it's a doorway, you have to put a mezuzah on all of them. Amar amemar, hay pitha de akarna hayav b'mezuzah. If you have an opening that's at the corner of a house, you have to put a mezuzah. Amar le Rav Asher amemar, v'had le pasimin. Hold on, why would you have to put a mezuzah on a doorway that's in the corner of a room if it has no doorposts? Amar le ade pasime. And he says, those are the doorposts, meaning the end of the wall. There's a few different configurations you can think of for this, but here's one example. Let's say you had a doorway, so on you have the wall. At the end of the wall, you have a door attached to the wall. On the other side is just the corner, so there's no doorpost. Or something like this, where you have a corner, cut off the corner, and you have a door over here, and let's say there's no doorpost on the sides, right? It's just the door it goes right to the wall. Or let's say there's no wall at all on that side. And so in all these cases where you might have a door, but no doorway, it's just the door is attached directly to it closes right onto the wall, you still are required to have put up a mezuzah. And even though there's no frame, there's no door frame, but the end of the wall, that is serving as the door frame, and so it still requires a mezuzah. Rapapa ikla lebe mor Shemuel hazahu pitcha tela hava le ela pasim ehad misemala v'abida le mezuzah amar le keman kerebi meir emad amar Rabbi Meir miyamin misemol mi amar. Rapapa went to the home of Mor Shemuel, and he saw that he had an entranceway that had only one doorpost on one side, and the other side just went right up to the wall. And that doorpost was on the left side, and yet Mor Shemuel put a mezuzah on that doorpost on the left side as you're going in. It might look like this. Here you have a doorpost, and let's say there's a door that goes from here to the wall, so that when you close the door, okay, there's a hinge over here, so that goes around. It doesn't really matter where the hinge is. One side of the door goes to this doorpost, and the other side, when you close it, it just goes right up against this wall. So here you see there's no doorpost at all. There's not even an edge of a wall. Now, if you had, let's say you go from this side into this side. This is the outside and you're going in. Now you're supposed to put it on the right side, but there's nowhere to put it on the right side. There's no doorpost. There's not even an edge of a wall, so there's no way you could put it on the right side. And so this Mor Shemuel, he had it on the left side because that's the only side that has a doorpost. So that's the case. And Rav Papa went there and said, why'd you put one mezuzah on the left side? Who are you following? Are you following Rabbi Meir? Rabbi Meir, we're about to see his opinion, says even if there's only one doorpost, you still put a mezuzah. But Rabbi Meir only said that if the one doorpost is on the right. And so if it was the other way around, let's say you went in from, this is the outside, and you went from outside to inside, and then this doorpost would be on the right, then fine, you would do that. But that wasn't the case. The arrangement of the rooms was that you go this way, and this is on the left. And so that Papa said, Moshe Shemuel, sorry, even if you follow Rabbi Meir, who says you put mezuzah on one doorpost, that's only if that doorpost is on the right, not if it's on the left, so you don't need a mezuzah here. Maihi. Now, how do you know that a mezuzah goes on the right side? Detanya, betecha, biatecha min hayamin. Because we're going to revocalize betecha, that you have to write the mezuzah on your home, on the doorpost of your house, we can revocalize it as biatcha. You're coming in, and you come in from the right, on the right. Wait, how do you know that you come into a house on the right? Maybe you come in on the left. Who says right, left? I mean, we drive on the right side of the road, and often when we walk, you're supposed to walk on the right side of the street, but you don't necessarily always go on the right side of a doorway when you come in. Talmud omar betecha, ma Talmud omar, amar Abba derech biatecha min hayamin dechi akar inish kar'eh dimina akar. So we explain, that's why it says the word betecha. But how does the word betecha mean on the right? Rabba explains, the way that you come in is from the right, because when you take a step, you put your right foot first, your right foot forward. When you start walking, most people start walking with their right foot. And so when you're at a threshold and now you're going to walk into the house, you walk in with your right foot, and that's why we put the mezuzah on the right side. Rav Shemuel bar Acha kamed Rav Papa, mishemed Rava bar Ula Amar. Rav Shemuel, the son of Acha, said in front of Rav Papa, in the name of Rava bar Ula, Mehacha, a different source. Vayikach Yehoyada hakohen Aron echad, vayikob hor bedarto, vayiten oto esel mizbeach, מימין, בבוא איש בית אדוני ונתנו שם הכהנים שומרי הסף את כל הכסף המובע בית השם. When the Bet HaMikdash required some fixing, some renovations, and so they had to raise money for it. So Yehoyada the Kohen took a chest and put a hole on the top. This is the first tzedakah box ever. And he put it next to the Mizbeach on the right side as someone comes into the Bet HaMikdash courtyard area. And so you see, since it says he puts it on the right as people come in, and then the Kohanim would put all the money there, and then they filled up the money, and they put it into a storehouse, and then they counted it, and they were able to make the renovations. So you see here that when you come in, that is, you come into a room, you come in on the right. So that's why we put a mezuzah on the right. Now, we said that according to the Rabbi Meir, if there's only one doorpost, you still put the mezuzah on that one doorpost. Where do we see that? Detanya, Bait she'en lo ela pasim echad, Rabbi Meir mechayev b'mezuzah, v'chachamim potrin. Because there's a braita that teaches if you have a room or house that has only one doorpost, Rabbi Meir says you still have to put a mezuzah. Chachamim say you don't have to. So that's what we were quoting. We were quoting this braita, this opinion of Rabbi Meir above. Now, what's the source of Rabbanan? My Tamad Rabbanan, mezuzot ketib, because it says mezuzot in plural. So therefore, you only have to put the mezuzah. The word mezuzah has two meanings. We say mezuzah, we commonly we say it referring to the scroll that we put up. But actually, the word mezuzot means a doorpost. Al mezuzot betecha ubisharecha. You write these words on the doorpost. So the word mezuzot, because it's plural, that means you have to have two doorposts. Then you have to fulfill this mitzvah by putting it on one of the two doorposts. But if you don't have two doorposts, then you don't have to do anything at all. That's the source for Rabbanan. My Tamad Rabbi Meir. What's Rabbi Meir going to say? Doesn't it say double, two doorposts? Tetanya. Mezuzot shomei mi'ut mezuzot shetayim. Keshu omer, מזוזות בפרשה שנייה שאין תלמוד לומר, הווה ריבוי אחר ריבוי ואין ריבוי אחר ריבוי, אלא למעט, מעטו הכתוב, למזוזה אחת בני רבי ישמעאל. And so we learn it from this baraita where we quote again the word mezuzot, and that means it's plural. What's the minimum of plural? Two. Fine. Then you know you need two. That's in the first paragraph. In the second paragraph of Shema, it says mezuzot again. So what is that coming to teach? It doesn't come to teach anything. It's not adding anything else. What, four doorposts? And so this is a inclusionary word after another inclusionary word. But it's not teaching anything else that's new. And so there's a rule that when you have a riboy and then another riboy, actually it's going to do the opposite, kind of like a double negative. And therefore it's coming to exclude, and it's coming to exclude even if you don't have plural mezuzot, even if you have only one mezuzah, then you still have to put this the scroll, the words on it. That's the derivation according to Rabbi Ishmael. Now here's something interesting. Rabbi Meir lives after Rabbi Ishmael. He's a generation later than Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was his teacher. So how could Rabbi Ishmael be giving a source for the opinion of Rabbi Meir? I think what actually is, if you look at the Baraita, if you just read the Baraita alone, it's not talking about the case of Rabbi Meir, where you only have one doorpost. Rather, just start reading from here, and the derivation is actually for a different issue. The question is, how many mezuzot do you have to put? You have one doorway with two doorposts, a regular doorway. If you read the pasuk simply, sounds like Uchtavtam al mezuzot betecha. You have to write these words on both mezuzot. That's what you would think. You have to write it. You have to put the words on the right and on the left side. Put it on both sides. And so, how do you know you should only put it on one of the mezuzot, one of the doorposts? And so that's what Rabbi Ishmael teaches. Only one of the doorposts. That's what Rabbi Ishmael was originally talking about. Not the case of Rabbi Meir. But now that we have this derasha, we can use it also for Rabbi Meir. In other words, since you even when you have two doorposts, you only write it on one because you have this ribuy achar ribuy. Therefore, even if you only have one, you still put it on there. And according to the statement above, only if it's the doorpost that's on the right. רבי עקיבא אומר, אינו צריך, כשהוא אומר על המשקוף על שתי המזוזות, שאין תלמוד לומר שתה, מה תלמוד לומר שתה? זה בנאיו, כל מקום שנאמר מזוזות, אינו אלא אחת, עד שיפרט לך כתוב שניים. רבי עקיבא says, I don't have to learn it from this. The fact that it says mezuzot twice in the two paragraphs, I have a simpler way to learn this law, and that is because regarding Korban Pesach, it says you take the blood and you're going to put it on the lintel and on the two mezuzot. So when it comes to the blood of Korban Pesach, you put it not only on top, but also on both sides. Now, why does it have to say shetem mezuzot? If it just said al mashkof al ha-mezuzot, I would know already. Mezuzot is plural, so I would assume I put it on both of them. Why do I have to say two mezuzot? Oh, this is a paradigm. And this teaches you that anytime it says the word mezuzot by itself without the word sheteh, it means that you put it on only one of them, unless the pasuk says two. So that's why it's saying two, to say, in this case, for Korban Pesach, you put it on both mezuzot. But in another case, where you don't have the word shetayim, you'd only put it on one. And that's how you know, in the original statement of Rabbi Akiva, again, was not talking about the case of Rabbi Meir when there was only one doorpost. He's talking about a regular case. You have a full frame, and you might think that you put the mezuzah on both of the doorposts, and then he learns by comparison to the Korban Pesach. Over there it says the two mezuzot. Here it doesn't say two, so therefore you only put a mezuzah on one of the doorposts. However, now we are reusing it, applying it, Rabbi Akiva's derivation, to help Rabbi Meir, that even if you only have one doorpost, that's sufficient because you're only putting it on one anyway. So if you have just a right doorpost, you put it only on that one. Tenor Rabbanan, Uchtavtam Yachol Yichtebena al Ha'abanim. Now Braita asks a really good question. If you read the pasuk yourself, Uchtavtam, you write these words, Al Mezuzot Betecho Bisharecha, on the doorpost. It sounds like you write them physically right onto the doorposts, onto the bricks, onto the stones of the doorpost. You could write it with ink or paint on the doorpost, or inscribe it, or chisel it. So why not write it directly on the doorpost? Who says that you should write it on parchment and then attach the parchment to the doorpost? Ne'emar kan kitiba v'ne'emar lehalan kitiba. Ma lehalan al hasefer afkan al hasefer. And the answer is we learn in Gezer HaShava. Since uchtavtam, that's the verb kitiba, writing. And where else do we see the verb writing? Over there. It doesn't say what pasuk is talking about. It could be one of a couple of them. One is when a man wants to give a get to his wife. It says vecha tabla sefer kiritut. So writing, and how does he write? He writes it on a sefer, on a scroll. Or another one is a king. It says the king has to have a copy of this Torah, and he writes it on a scroll. It also says regarding sotah that they write the paragraph on a scroll with ink and scrape off the ink and so on. So you have a few places where the word kitiva is referring to writing with ink on a scroll. And so therefore here also uchtavta means on a scroll. O kelach lederech zo, ne'emar kan kitiba v'ne'emar lehalan kitiba, ma lehalan al ha'avanim, afkan al ha'abanim. But the Braita says you can argue the opposite way. It's true, it says here the word uchtavtam, the verb lichtov, and it says elsewhere the word kitiba. Elsewhere, it says it regarding stones. Where is that talking about? The Gemara here doesn't specify which pasuk is talking about, but it could be this one. At the end of Devarim, it says, when you cross over the Jordan River, you should take avanim gedolot v'sadeta otam basid, take large stones and coat them with plaster. The plaster is good because then it will keep the writing well. V'chatabta alehen et kol divrei haTorah hazot be'obrecha. Here's the word v'chatabta. You're going to write all the words of this Torah onto the stones. So the lichtob is also said regarding stones. Another place that it says that is regarding the luchot. V'yomer Adonai el Moshe pesol lecha shenei luchot abanim karishonim v'chatabti al haluchot et hadevarim asher hayu al luchot harishonim asher shibarta. Hashem tells Moshe, go and chisel out two tablets like the first ones, and I will write on those tablets the devarim, the aseret devarim that were on the first luchot that you broke. And so we have kitiba is said regarding stones. So maybe when it says uchtavtam, it means that you write it directly on the stones of the doorposts. It's possible that the rabbis are saying don't write it on stones precisely because it would remind you of the Ten Commandments. And it seems that originally the mezuzah might have had the Ten Commandments in it. We know that from Mishnah Masechet Tamid, that in the Bet HaMikdash, while they were doing the Korban Tamid, they would recite every day Aseret HaDiberot, and also Shema, Vayam Shema, and Vayomer. And then, at a later point, the sages said, no, stop saying Aseret HaDiberot, you're not allowed to recite them, because the Christians came along and they said, only the Ten Commandments are authoritative, and you don't have to do the other commandments. And the rabbis who said, this is not a good idea. People are going to see that we recite the Ten Commandments only, and then they might get in the wrong idea that only these 10 are authoritative, applicable, and not the other ones, so like the Christians are teaching. And therefore the rabbi said, you know what? We have to say not to demote, treat everything equally. We're not going to give extra importance to the Ten Commandments over any other, to teach people that all 613 mitzvot are authoritative, are still applicable. And so they removed it from the daily recitation. When they removed it, it's possible that it also used to be in tefillin and mezuzot. We in fact found tefillin in the Dead Sea Scrolls in the Dead Sea caves that have all the same 4 parshiot that we have today in ours. Plus, it also has Aseret HaDibrot. It's not in a separate section. It's in Shema, but Shema, the paragraph right before Shema, is the 10 Commandments. So it just has a long section with the 10 Commandments and then goes into Shema. So we see that there was evidence, at least some Jews did have the 10 Commandments in their tefillin. So it's possible that at the same time that the rabbi said, do not recite the 10 Commandments anymore in the prayers, they also said, do not put it in the tefillin, do not put it in the mezuzah. And part of that, this is just a guess, is that they said, don't write it on stones because writing it on stones is too much like Aseret HaDibrot. Rather, write it, the 2 paragraphs that you're going to write it in a scroll. And a scroll is more similar to our entire Sefer Torah. So we want to associate a reminder every time you walk in and walk out. We want you to remember not only the 10 Commandments, and then during the time of early Christianity, that was a real threat that Jews would go over and say, oh, well, let's just do the 10. I mean, it's okay if pagans take upon themselves the 10 Commandments. That's so good. They're going from 0 to 10. But not for Jews to go to 6:13 to 10 is demotion, is a problem. And so this possibly is part of the reason why we write it on a scroll. So the mezuzah is a reminder of the entire Torah scroll. It wouldn't be convenient, obviously, to have a whole Torah scroll on the doorpost, but this small one as a reminder, a pointer to the whole Torah, all the mitzvot, not just the 10 Commandments. And so this possibly is the reason why the rabbis move away from the writing on the avanim. Okay, so now we have the word uchtavtam that could be referred to writing on a scroll. It could also refer to writing on stone. So which one should we choose? When you have a gezerah shavah, but it's ambiguous, then you have to look conceptually. Which one is it more like? Danin kitiva noheget ledorot mikitiva noheget ledorot, and danin kitiva noheget ledorot mikitiva she'ena noheget ledorot. Which one is it more similar to? Let's learn writing that is applicable to all generations. That's the mezuzah, applies to all generations, from another type of writing that also applies to all generations. And that would be true for a get, for sotah, for a king. All of those that are writing on parchment apply to all generations. And we're not going to learn it from a mitzvah about writing that does not apply to generations. And that's true for the 10 Commandments. You don't write, that's a commandment only to Moshe. Go get the Luhot and write the 10 Commandments. And also the one when you go across the Jordan and you write the Torah on the big stones. That's just a one-time commandment, not for future generations. So it makes more sense that mezuzah that applies to all generations should be compared to the other cases that are for all generations. And there's another pasuk that also supports this law. Vayomer lahem Baruch mipiv yikra elai et hadevarim ha'ele v'ani koteb al hasefer bedyo. Baruch, the scribe of Yirmiyah, they asked him, how did you write the prophecies of Yirmiyah? And he explains, Yirmiyah would dictate the words, his prophecies to me, and I wrote them down with ink in a scroll. So we see that it says here, ketibah, they would write them down, and he specifies, how do you write them? And also on parchment, in a scroll, with ink. And from there we learn that we should do the same for a mezuzah. Amar le Ravacha bered Rava le Rav Asher. Rachamana amar al mezuzot. V'at amart nelef ketiba ketiba. Ravacha, the son of Rava, tells Rav Asher, I don't understand this derivation. The pasuk, the Torah, Harachaman, Hashem says, write them al mezuzot. He couldn't be clearer. How else? What else do you want the Torah to say? Write them on the doorposts. And you're going and making a gezerah shavah. It says the word kitibah here. It says the word kitibah there. You're doing this fancy derasha, but you're ignoring the simple reading of the pasuk that says write it on the doorpost. So what is this? Amar kera uchtavtam kitibah tama v'hadad al hamezuzot. And the answer is no. We have to fulfill this because the pasuk says uchtavtam. Literally, it means you should write them. Katavta otam. These words. But you can also divide it into 2 words, v'katav tam. You should write it completely, and then you put it on the mezuzah, on the doorpost. In other words, if you would write something directly on the doorpost, you start writing on the stones, on the bricks. You write shin, mem, so shema. So now you're writing something, but it's not complete until you finish the paragraph. It's not complete. However, it says v'katav otam, v'katav tam has to be a complete writing. So the only way you can do that is if you write both paragraphs on a scroll, you have a complete writing. Now you take this complete writing, as soon as you finish the last letter, now it becomes a holy object. Now it's a mezuzah. And then you put it, after it's complete, you attach it to the wall, then you can fulfill v'katav tam, and then you put it al mezuzot. Okay, fine. I like that idea. But now that you have this derivation, v'katav tam, you have to write it completely and then put it on the wall, so that I know I have to write it on the scroll. I can't write it directly on the stones. Then I don't need the gezerah shava anymore. V'katav, that just like katav elsewhere is writing on parchment, on a scroll, here also it's on a scroll. I don't need that gezerah shava because I have this derivation that you just said, ketiba tama. So why do you need both then? Ilav gezerah shava hava amina lichteva abna v'likbe'a asefa. No, without the gezerah shava, I might have thought that you can write the two paragraphs, Sheman v'haya, on a stone, on a plaque. Write the whole thing out on your desk, and then you have a full ketiba tama, you have a complete writing, and then you could take that plaque that's on a stone and attach it to the wall. So you could still fulfill ketiba tama by writing it on a stone. So that's why I need the gezerah shava to teach me that writing in this context refers to writing specifically on a scroll, and then you have to finish it on the scroll and then attach it. So that's why I need both derivations, and that's the reason why we write it on the scroll and not directly on the wall. Arba parshiyot shebetefilin me'akevot zo et zo. Afilu ketab echad me'akevan. Pishita. Now back to the Mishnah that said the 4 paragraphs of tefillin are all required for one another. If you have only 1 or 3 of the paragraphs, you don't fulfill tefillin. And then it says even one letter that's missing is going to make it pasul. Isn't this obvious? If you're missing a letter, you don't have the whole thing. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, la nisrecha ela lekoso shel yod. So Rav says, we need this line in the Mishnah to teach me that even a thorn, the part sticking out of the yod, is required. But that's also obvious, because if you don't have a fully shaped yod, then it's not a yod. And if it's not a yod, you're missing a letter. So that's obvious too. We don't need the Mishnah to teach us that. Now we need it for the other statement that I've taught, that any letter that does not have parchment on all 4 sides is no good. We saw this already when we talked about mezuzah, and now we're applying it also to tefillin. And so therefore, even if you have a letter, even if all of the ink of the letter is there, but on one side you have a hole or a cut in the parchment, so there's no background, and you can't have a foreground without a background. So you need the ink to be surrounded by parchment on all sides, on all 4 sides. We did mention if you have a hair, you could have a hole in the middle of a hair. That's okay. You could have a hole in the parchment elsewhere between the lines, but not right next to a letter. Otherwise, that letter is not complete. Tenor Rabbanan, letotafot, herekan arba dibre Rabbi Ishmael. And now this Braita wants to derive, how do you know that we require 4 paragraphs to be written in the tefillin? Well, it says the word totafot 3 times in the Torah, and twice they are spelled chaser, without a vav between the peh and the taf. So in Shemot, Yod Gimel, it says letotafot, but without the vav, and even though the vocalization is totafot, which is plural, but the consonants by themselves can be read letotefet, which is singular. So that teaches 1. Also in the Shema paragraph in Devarim chapter 6, it says they're spelled also without a vav, letotefet. You could read it totefet, that's another 1. So that's 1 plus 1, that's 2. Now the one in the Vahayim Shamoa paragraph in Devarim chapter 11, there it's spelled maleh letotafot. It has to be read as a plural, and so the minimum of a plural is 2, and that's how you get 4 altogether, 1 totefet, and 1 with a vav, so that means that's 2. Then you have 4 altogether. That's the derivation of Rabbi Ishmael. Now we have a bit of a problem, because in the Masoretic text, that's in the Aleppo Codex and in our Sifrei Torah, all of them are actually written chaser for the second vav, the second spot that could have a vav between the peh and the taf. No places in the Torah, according to the Masoretic text, have a vav, and yet the Gemara learns a derivation from the vav in Totafot in one of the instances. So this is an inconsistency. The Ran surprisingly said that the Gemara should take precedence and we should change our Torah scrolls to match the Gemara's version. However, everybody else says no. It is even though the Gemara says this, our Sifrei Torah follow a tradition that was copied by the Sofrim, but from the Sefarim before that, and therefore we leave our Sifrei Torah alone. We do not change it based on the Gemara. And what about this contradiction here? There's actually many other cases. There's a handful, a bunch of other cases that are like this. Where there's a discrepancy, a small discrepancy of just spelling between the Gemara and the way we have it in our Sifrei Torah. But not to worry, really the halacha is following halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is a tradition that the tefillin have 4 sections in it, and that is true no matter what. And the fact that we connect it to a pasuk, so okay, it could be an asmachta, could be a derivation that comes after we know the law, right? Because we know how tefillin are made, and so tefillin are made in this way. And then you want to say, oh, let me find a derivation. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva finds a derivation, Rabbi Ishmael finds a derivation. Look, they argue on their derivations, but they all agree that you have to have 4, and therefore it's not the law is not actually derived from the Pesukim. The law is known already from oral tradition, and then we find a pasuk to back it up. So if the pasuk doesn't back it up, it doesn't change the halacha. And so that's why we keep the Torah the way it is, and we keep the halacha also the way it is. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Eno sarich tot bekatfi shetayim pat bafriki shetayim. Rabbi Akiva says, no, I don't need that derivation. You have to go find all 3 times it says totafot. I have a simpler way, just from the one word itself. The word tat in this katfi language means 2, and pat in the African language means 2. So the word totafot itself means 2 plus 2. That's how I know it. Tenor banan. Yachol yichtevem al 4 orot v'yanichem be'arba batim be'arba orot. Now, in the tefillin shel rosh, you write it in 4 sections. Now, since it says 4, right, so does that mean that you can write it on 4 separate parchments, 1 paragraph each, and place it into 4 pouches? 4 separate pouches from different parchments. So you'd have 4 parchments with 4 compartments, 4 pouches with 4 parchments, 1 in each pouch, as maybe that's what the tefillin shel rosh should look like. Talmud Omar, uzikaron ben anecha, zikaron echad amarti lecha velo shenayim ushlosha zichronot. But another pasuk says it will be a remembrance, singular, between your eyes. So that means there has to be 1 remembrance and not 2, 3, or 4 remembrances. Hakesad. So how can you reconcile both of these pasukim? On the one hand, it's a single remembrance. On the other hand, it's totafot, which is plural compartments. So how do you do that? Kotvan al 4 orot, manichan be'arba batim be'or echad. So we're going to write the 4 paragraphs each on a separate parchment. This is all for tefillin shel rosh, and then we'll place them in 4 separate compartments, but they're all made out of 1 hide. And that's how tefillin are made today. It's a complicated process. You have to take 1 flat hide, and using a mold, doing it over and over again, we stretch the hide, and so that it will create 4 pockets. And then you take those pockets and you have to smooth them out and make them perfectly straight, squeeze them together in a hydraulic press, and then you have a compartment for each of the scrolls, and you put 4 separate parchments into each of the compartments, and the compartments are all made out of 1 solid piece of leather. V'im ketavan be'or echad v'nichan ba'arba batim yasa. Now, b'di'avad, if you wrote all 4 paragraphs on one piece of parchment and placed it into the tefillin, into the different compartments, you still fulfilled your obligation. So here you see the tefillin shel rosh, and from the outside you can see that there are lines here, and actually if you would pull these apart, they are completely separate. There's not just a line etched into the tefillin. These are completely separate pockets, but it's all made out of one solid piece of leather. And so if you open it up, you have these 4 compartments. And so the proper way to do it is the way we do it, which is you take each paragraph and you roll it up and it goes upright. So that just the same orientation as the sheen here. When the tefillin are upright, the letters are also upright. So it's placed in each of the 4. So they're all separate, not connected to each other, the parchments. Now what if the parchments were all one? And so you had it, let's say, one long piece with the 4 paragraphs separated by some space, and then if you would cut the top and just leave it connected on the bottom, you could put them each into the compartments upright, and they would just be connected at the bottom edge of the parchment and still fit into the compartment. So if you did that, then it still fulfills the obligation. You need space between them. What's the them talking about? Some say it's talking about the paragraphs that are on, if you have it on a single parchment. Another interpretation is you need space between the compartments of the tefillin itself. You see here, there's no space between them, right? You put up to the light and you couldn't see anything between them. And so that's the machloket, where the B says you have to have a little space between them. Hachamim say, you don't need any space between them. But they agree that you should place a string or a band between each of the 4 compartments. Pesulot, and if their furrows are not noticeable, then it's no good. And so you do need to put a string, and in fact we put a knot at the base. On the side of it, you can see the knot. There's a knot at the point of connection, at the seam between each of the compartments. And furthermore, you have to see them. Let's say you squeeze it together so well and make it totally flat so that you can't see it. Looks like it's one. That's also not good. So that's why we have you can see it, and also we do have a string that's at the base between each of the compartments. Tenora banan kesad kotvan. And now we ask, how do you write the sections of the tefillin? Tefillah shel yad kotva al or ehad. V'im ketava b'arba orot v'nicha b'bayit ehad yasa. The tefillin shel yad, now you should write it all on one parchment. You take one long thin parchment and you write the first paragraph and leave some space, and then the next column, the next paragraph, and so on. And then you roll the whole thing up and you put it all in one compartment for the tefillin shel yad. If, however, you wrote it on 4 separate parchments and you put it into one compartment of the tefillin shel yad, you fulfilled your obligation. That's okay. וצריך לדבק, שנאמר, והיה לך לאות על ידך, כשם שאות אחת מבחוץ, כך אות אחת מבפנים, דברי רבי יהודה. According to Rabbi Yehuda, if you have it on 4 separate parchments, you have to attach them together, because the pasuk says that it should be a sign upon your arm. And just like on the tefillin shel yad, if you look from the outside, you see one compartment. So just like from the outside, it's a sign of one, so too on the inside, it has to be all one. So if you did write it on 4 parchments, you have to attach the parchments together and then put them all in together. Rabbi Yosef omed eno sarich. Rabbi Yosef says, no, you don't have to attach the parchments together. You can even put 4 separate parchments with each of the 4 paragraphs into the tefillin shel yad. Amar Rabbi Yosef, umodeh li Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi she'im en lo tefillin shel yad v'yesh lo shete tefillin shel rosh shetoleh or al achat mehen umanicha. Rabbi Yosef says that Rabbi Yehuda, the son of the distinguished one, that's still a Rabbi Yehuda, is giving him an honorific, and he says he agrees that, let's say a person doesn't have tefillin shel yad, but he has 2 tefillin shel rosh. Now he doesn't need 2 tefillin shel rosh, but he wants to somehow use a tefillin shel rosh as a tefillin shel yad. Now how are you going to do that? Because there's 4 compartments, but you need 1 compartment. So here's what you do. You can place a hide over the entire tefillin shel rosh, one of them. And now that you have a hide that's covering all of them, so you're making it all into one compartment, and then you can put it on your hand. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Yosef says. Even Rabbi Yehuda, who said that you need 4 separate parchments, agrees that you can put the one hide over the whole housing, and then you can use it as a tefillin shel yad. We ask, Modeh, hainu peluktayu. What do you mean he agrees? That's what they were arguing about. You can say he agrees if you're talking about a slightly different case. Oh, they argue on case A, but a slightly different case he agrees. But this is not a slightly different case. This is precisely the case that they're arguing about, because once you put the hide on top, the one single piece of hide on top, fine, you have one housing, but you still have 4 separate parchments inside. It's a tefillin shel rosh with 4 separate parchments. And Rabbi Yehuda said here that if the parchments, if you have 4 separate parchments, it's no good. They have to be attached. So he would say it's not good. Rava says, from the words of Rabbi Yosef, we can learn that Rabbi Yehuda changed his mind. At first he said, if it's 4 separate parchments, it has to be attached. But then, since Rabbi Yosef reported that Rabbi Yehuda would agree with him that you can turn a tefillin shel rosh into a tefillin shel yad by just putting a piece of hide on top of it and making it into one compartment, we see that Rabbi Yehuda must have changed his mind and thinks that even 4 separate parchments in the tefillin shel yad would still be kosher. Ini, we have a challenge. V'hashalach Rav Hananya mishemed Rabbi Yochanan tefillah shel yad osin ota shel rosh v'shel rosh en osin ota shel yad lefi she'en moridin mikedusha chamura likedusha kala. Now we're going to ask a question on this halacha that they mentioned, that you can take a tefillin shel rosh and turn it into tefillin shel yad by putting a piece of hide over the whole thing. However, that can't be, because Rav Hananya sent a message in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that if you have shel yad, you can transform it into tefillin shel rosh. You have to reconfigure it, and then you can make it into a rosh. But a rosh, you cannot turn that into a tefillin shel yad. Why? Even if you reconfigure it and you do what you have to do to make it kosher, you're not allowed to do it, because you cannot go down from a higher level of kedusha to a lower level of kedusha. The tefillin shel rosh is on one's head, it's a crown, it's more prominent, and so you can't take that and reduce it to a lower level of kedusha of the tefillin shel yad, which is not as prominent. La kashya, we said, no, there's no problem here. Ha be'atikata, ha be'chadetata. This paraita that says you cannot change it is talking about when it's used. So you already used it as for rosh. Now you cannot use it for a yad. Even if you put a piece of hide over it and do whatever and change its configuration, still it was used as a rosh. That's a higher level of kedusha. You cannot go down. Whereas when the Rabbi Yosef said his halacha, he's talking about it's new. It was never worn yet, so therefore it was never yet designated as a tefillin shel rosh. It was made as a tefillin shel rosh with the configuration of a tefillin shel rosh, but it doesn't yet have the kedusha of a tefillin shel rosh, because it's brand new and it was never used. And so that's the case where you can transform it into a yad. And according to the opinion, there is an opinion that says designation is significant. That even though you never used it as the tefillin shel rosh, the fact that when he was making it, he had in mind this will be a tefillin shel rosh that already gives it the kedusha of tefillin shel rosh. So then, how could you use it as how could you ever turn a rosh into a yad? And the answer is that he made a condition from the beginning when he was making the tefillin that, listen, I'm making this tefillin, and someone who can use it for rosh or yad, I'm not designating it as one or the other. So in that case, even though it was made first with the configuration of a rosh, you can still change it into a tefillin shel yad.
Tenor Rabbanan, kesad sidran. Kadesh li v'haya kibiyacha miyamin, shema v'haya im shamoa misemol. And now we come to the famous controversy about the order of the paragraphs in the tefillin. The Baraita asks, what is the proper order? And it says, Kadesh li and v'haya kibiyacha on the right side. That's the 2 paragraphs from Shemot Perek Yud Gimel. They are back to back.
but even though they're back to back in the same perek, but nevertheless they are two separate paragraphs. And so you put Kadesh Li and then Vayaki B'Yacha. That's on the right side. And then we have Shema and Vayam Shemoa on the left side. So you can see this is somewhat ambiguous. It is going in order that it appears in the Torah. That seems to be the order. And in fact, that's exactly what Rashi says. He says, Kadesh Li, so that's sanctify, you put on the right side. And so Rashi is interpreting this to mean on the right side would be from the perspective of the observer, someone looking at the person who's wearing the tefillin. So if he were reading it, he would be reading from right to left. So you have Kadesh Li, Vayaki B'Yacha, and then that's in Shemot, and then Shema, which is in Devarim Perek Vav, and then Vayayim Shemoa, which is in Devarim Perek Yod Aleph. And so there you go. It goes in the order of appearance in the Torah from right to left, as from the perspective of an observer. Okay, so that's Rashi and that's Rambam, and that's most tefillin that people wear are in that order. However, you can notice that in the Baraita, it doesn't just say Kadesh, just list all the four paragraphs. It says these two on the right and those two on the left. And so it's grouping them together. And that suggests a possible alternative explanation, which is Kadeshi has to be on the outside, and then on the inside, on the right. And then Shema perhaps is going back to the opposite side. On the outer part, you need Shema. And then Vayayim Shemoa in the middle section, but on the left side. And that, in fact, is what Rabbeinu Tam says, Vayaki B'Yachad. Also, again, from the perspective of the person looking at the tefillin wearer, we have Kadesh Li on the right, Vayaki B'Yacha next to it. That's the same as Rashi. But then, instead of putting Shema next, he's interpreting the Braita as saying Shema is all the way on the left, and then Vahaya in the middle, so that the outer ones are Kadesh Li and Shema, and the two Vahayas are back to back with each other, next to each other in the middle. So that's the famous controversy where some people even wear both Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. V'hatanya ipecha. Now we ask, we have a baraita that says the opposite order of what we just said here. This seems to contradict. Amar Abayada kashya. Kan mimino shel koreh, kan mimino shel maniach. V'hakoreh, koreh kesidran. Abaya says, no, there's no problem. One of these baraitot are talking about from the perspective of the reader. That would be the observer. And so Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam say that this baraita here, the first one, is from the perspective of the observer, and that's why they have Kadesh Li, the first one, all the way on the right side, reading from right to left. Whereas the other baraita that's not cited here, but we can reconstruct it because it says the opposite of this, is talking about from the perspective of the person wearing the tefillin. He also reads from right to left, but for him, right to left would be the opposite order. So if you're giving from his perspective, then let's say according to Rashi, that other baraita would say Vehaya first, and then Shema, because that's what comes next, and says those two are on the right, and the other two are on the left, because it's from his perspective. But in fact, they agree with each other. Now, note that the Baraita in Abaya doesn't say which Baraita is from this perspective and which Baraita is from that perspective. And therefore, it's possible to switch them around, that the first Baraita is, in fact, from the perspective of the person wearing tefillin. And if so, you would come to a different conclusion. And those two possible conclusions are precisely what we have in the opinion of Ravad citing Rav Haya Gaon, and an ancient work on the writing of tefillin called Shimusha Rabbah. And there, in the opinion of Shimusha Rabbah, it's the exact opposite of Rashi. So according to that, yes, that first baraita is going from right to left from the perspective, but from the perspective of the wearer. And therefore, you go in order that appears in Torah. And so on the right, from the perspective of the wearer, you have Kadesh Li, Vayaki B'Yacha, and then you have Shema and Vayayim Shemoa. So that's exactly the opposite of Rashi. Whereas, according to Rav Haya Gaon, He is the counterpart to the Benutam. It's the same as Benutam, but reversed. And so you have Kadesh Li and Vehaya Kibiacha from the perspective of the wearer is on the right side, and then on the left side you have Shema all the way on the left and Vehaya in the middle. What the Benutam and Avaya have in common is that the Vehayas are both in the middle. It's just that it's switched from the perspective of this person, or the other person switches the right and the left. Amar Rav Chananel, Amar Rav, Hechelif Parshiotea Pesulot. Rav says that if someone changes the order, then the tefillin are invalid. Amar Abaye, La amaran ela gavaita lebaraita, baraita legavaita. Aval gavaita legavaita, baraita lebaraita, let lan ba. However, Abaye says it's only pasul if you switch an inner with an outer or an outer with an inner. In other words, let's take Rashi. If you take the Shema, which is supposed to be in the inner one, it's the third one, and you put it on the outside and switch it with Vayayim Shamoa, then it's no good. Or the other way around, it's no good. But if you switch the two inner ones, that's okay. Or if you switch the two outer ones and you put it the opposite way, then also that's okay, according to Abaye. So again here, the inner to the outer, outer to the inner, it's no good. But if you switch the two inner ones, or switch the two outer ones, then it's not a problem, it's still kosher. Amar le Rava, Maishena gavaita le baraita, or baraita le gavaita de la, tahach ba'el le mechze avira la kachazye, v'ha de la ba'el le mechze avira kachazya. Rava challenges Abaye's logic and says, why do you make this distinction? What's the difference when you change the inside to the outside and outside into the inside, that you say that is invalid? Well, I guess you're saying that because that which is supposed to see the airspace, meaning the one that's supposed to be on the edge, when you switch it into the middle, now is not seeing the air. And that which was in the middle and is not supposed to see the air, now is seeing the air. So that's why it's a problem. Okay, fine, that makes sense. But you should then extend your logic to the other case. Baraita le baraita, vegavaita le gavaita nameh, hach de ba'ya le michze avira diyamin, kachazya avira dismol, vedismol kachazya avira diyamin. Then if you switch the two outside ones with each other, or if you switch the two inside ones with each other, you will also have a problem that the one that's supposed to see the airspace on the right, now that you switch them, is going to see the airspace on the left. And the one that's supposed to see the airspace on the left is now going to see the airspace on the right. Ela la shena. Therefore, Rava says it doesn't matter whether you change an inner for an outer or the two outer ones. In all those cases, changing the order will make the tefillin invalid. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.